Welcome to the second weekly installment of GNN, a podcast by Shoddycast, the makers of the Fallout lore storyteller web series. I'm your host, Charles Battersby.
And I'm Austin Horrigan, with no relation to Frank Horrigan, for those of you who asked.
And later on today, we will have a special guest, Howard Braunschweiger, who does the voice of Grognak the Barbarian here on GNN, the new adventures of Grognak the Barbarian, Sundays on GNN. He'll be joining us later, but now we should start right off with the big news this week, which is Bethesda kicking off E3 by introducing a bunch of games, one of which was Fallout 4. So, Austin, your thoughts on finally seeing more in-depth information and some actual gameplay and VATs and character creation. Tell me what you think.
My overall first impression was I loved everything. I'm generally a huge skeptic when it comes to reveals and everything, and I just couldn't help myself. I got extremely excited while watching it. I think some of my favorite parts were trying to pick out little clues for what we would be looking for in the months to come, and eventually with the final game. My favorite little tidbit is right off the bat when he talked about the time frame, he being game director Todd Howard of Bethesda, and he mentioned that the protagonist wakes up 200 years after the Great War. So I think we can presume that we're having a sometime around the Fallout 3 New Vegas timeframe, 2277. I think is what we're looking at, but I guess it could be sometime after too, but right around there.
Yes, when he says 200 years, I am wondering whether he's just rounding up or rounding down slightly, because Fallout 3 was set exactly 200 years after the Great War, and then Fallout New Vegas was set 5 years after that. So I'm wondering just how closely the time frame is supposed to sync up, because we do have characters who are from the Commonwealth, which is where Fallout 4 is going to be set. They've come to the Capital Wasteland in 2077. So I'm wondering, are all these events happening simultaneously? Are we going to see events happening in Boston that then play out in Fallout 3? Or are we seeing the game set a little after the events of Fallout 3? And that's something that Bethesda hasn't cleared up as of the time that we're recording this.
What were you most excited to see? What got you the most revved up during the trailer, during that presentation, I should say?
Actually, the stuff that got me most excited wasn't the actual Fallout 4 game, but all the other stuff that they announced around it. So they announced that there's going to be the functional Pip-Boy application for your smartphone with a actual physical Pip-Boy that you can plug your smartphone in, which is something that not just fans, but cosplayers have wanted to have this. And so this is something that I was hoping there would be a little Pip-Boy app, but I didn't think they were going to go so far as to make an app that's going to actually work with the game as a second screen experience that'll also fit into an actual official functioning gadget that they will sell you.
We saw quite a bit of things that addressed some of our speculations last week in the reveal at E3.
Yeah, there were a lot of things that I knew were going to be in the game. So, I knew that we'd have, companions that we'd be able to command a little more efficiently than in the previous games. And I knew we'd have more customization and, for weapons and for the armor. So what I saw was actually mostly what I thought it was going to be like, but actually more extravagant and a much grander scale than I had actually anticipated it being.
It is almost overwhelming, especially the building system with the in-game modding, which I just found utterly, I don't want to say utterly mind-blowing in a way that I cannot comprehend that kind of system, but it was surprising to see the amount of depth and detail of their crafting system. So, you have an iPhone, and I do not have an iPhone.
I pity you.
So I presume you've been playing Fallout Shelter.
I have not only been playing Fallout Shelter, I've been playing Fallout Shelter obsessively since Sunday night. If you check my Twitter account, Charles Battersby, all one word, no Y on the end. If you check my Twitter account from Sunday night, you'll see I made a little tweet at about midnight saying, I typed Fallout Shelter into the search window on the App Store, and I've been hammering the search button ever since. And so at this point in the game, after playing it obsessively for the last 3 days, I'm most of the way through. The highest level item you can get in the game, you need to have 100 dwellers in your vault, and I'm at about 70 now.
How would you describe it? Because I see it as a kind of, it reminds me of those tower building phone games where you're building up, except obviously you're building a vault. But it seems a lot more active than that to me.
Yes, the closest game to it, I would say, is This War of Mine. So if you've played that, this is like a funnier version of that. So it's done from a two-dimensional angle where you're building a vault. You start out with just a handful of vault dwellers, and you tunnel out new rooms for basic resources like food, water, electricity, plus special rooms for training, and special rooms for making new little vault dwellers, which we'll get on later. And so you recruit new vault dwellers, or you make your characters have sex to produce more vault dwellers, and then as you get more people, you unlock additional rooms. And the trick that I found is that my vault is just basically non-stop sex. Almost... So just about every female in my vault is pregnant at any one moment. And one of the fun things that they do in this game is that they have like a nightwear that you can put your characters in. So you just drop two characters into the living quarters, and they'll be in their sexy lingerie or sexy pajamas, and then they will run off into a little room in the back and come out. The woman will be pregnant, and a surprisingly short period of time later, there'll be a new child running around your vault.
Do people die of old age?
Well, I haven't had anyone die of old age. What I've noticed is that children grow to adulthood really quickly, but adults never seem to grow old. Now, there is combat in this, so characters can die. You'll be attacked by raiders who assault the vault doors of your vault. You can arm and equip your vault dwellers with different types of armor and different kinds of weapons to fight off the raiders. There will also be rad roaches, which will just suddenly burst out of nowhere to attack your vault dwellers. And you also have the option of sending people out into the wasteland to forage for supplies. What I've discovered is that it is a huge time sucker and battery drainer. It requires a good deal of micromanagement as you're playing if you want to maximize your efficiency, harvest all your resources and build up your population as quickly as possible. And it has an interesting business model too. Most games along this line, you'd be able to, buy premium currency and use the premium currency to speed up the construction of something. In this game, there's none of that. So the standard free-to-play iPhone game style of, buying Smurf berries or donuts to speed up construction, they're not using that. They're using a feature where you get random boxes of loot called Vault Tech lunchboxes that'll have armor or characters or resources, and you can just buy those with real-world money, or you can earn them by doing little mini quests within the game.
I just based on that alone, I really hope that it is a financial success, because I would love to see mobile gaming and microtransactions shift away from what the current model is, because it's absolutely tired. It's like it's built around frustrating the player, which drives me nuts. Well, I guess it succeeds in frustrating me at the very least.
Yeah, for those of you who don't really play this kind of games, you heard me mention Smurf berries and donuts. Smurf berries are the absolute worst case scenario of this kind of design, where in one of the Smurf games, you would play for about 45 minutes, and then you'd hit a roadblock where, in order to expand your Smurf village, you had to build a bridge that would either take 3 days, or you could spend 99 cents to buy Smurf berries that speed up the construction. So that was a game designed around kids playing it for 45 minutes and then having to set it down for 3 days or cough up the 99 cents.
So we got a lot of glimpses into plot elements in very short bursts in this E3 stage. The first one that I really noticed was the inclusion of a super mutant behemoth, which is, for those of you who have played Fallout 3 know, that is, and paid attention to the plot, that is a very specific kind of super mutant that is unique to the East Coast and presumably Maryland, but I guess obviously they've expanded in some way. And behemoths, and the reason a behemoth is perfect evidence of that is that they are unique to that brand of super mutant. They are the oldest of the East Coast super mutants who have grown to such an immense size. So we have East Coast super mutants.
Yes, the in-game explanation for that is that there were different batches of FEV around the country, and one of them was specific to one particular vault in Maryland. So there's, I suppose, two possible explanations. One would be that some of the super mutants from Maryland just moseyed up north, or that perhaps Boston has its own little vault or factory or military base somewhere with its own special little batch of FEV.
And I just saw today that the dog is immortal. For those of you who are wondering, the dog cannot die. So that's a little tidbit. I don't know if you knew that, but Todd Howard went on Twitter to confirm that the dog cannot die, so we won't be crying over a dead dog's body in Fallout 4.
Which is great. It's been a chronic problem in the series since way back with the first game, that the dog runs in to fight hand-to-hand and then gets hit when you fire that mini nuke.
I did notice that there were also Brotherhood in the E3 presentation. I'm not sure if they're an enemy faction. The player was fighting them in the demo, but that whole demo was kind of based around fighting and combat and everything, so I'm not sure if that's actually indicative of them being an antagonist or not.
And there's also the optional antagonist who might be able to ally with the Brotherhood or ally with the enemies. So if you're playing a negative karma build, perhaps you can fight with some bad guy faction, and then, depending on the player's choices, the Brotherhood will be good or bad.
I thought that the reveal trailer, when it was showing the old world, was just kind of like, hey, look what the life was like before the bombs. But the reveal expo at E3 showed that you will actually get to experience the old world, although for a very brief period of time. Yes,
and something I thought that was very interesting about this is that your character is specifically stated to be a veteran of the pre-Great War wars. So we are going to, no doubt, get a lot more lore about what happened in the days leading up to the Great War. As someone who actually lived through that, your character will be able to answer questions about it when dealing with NPCs throughout the game. So, yes, we'll definitely have answers to things that fans have been wondering about for the last 20 years.
How do you feel about the way the old world is depicted?
Well, last week I had ranted about this a little bit, that the designers of Fallout had tried to create a world that deserved its apocalypse, that the Cold War hostilities never ended, and that their 21st century was such a rotten place that it deserved to get blown up and replaced by this fun little weird wasteland. So now, of course, we're looking at an entirely different 21st century. The way the 21st century turned out to be was not really what people thought it was going to be like in the 90s. So I am interested in seeing if Bethesda is going to start tinkering with that retro futuristic look, if they're going to start altering the way that the pre-world America was within the Fallout games, because we've only had little hints of it in the previous games. And so now they do need to establish somehow that their pre-war 21st century was even a worse place than the real 21st century, which I think is going to be a big challenge.
So I'm going to take us into our artsy smartsy stuff. And you had mentioned in talking to me beforehand about the Revolutionary War and specifically Minutemen, because there is a mention of Minutemen in the Kotaku leaked script. And also, if you check out the Microsoft stage, they had more Fallout game footage to show, and a good portion of that showed an interaction that mirrored exactly the script from Kotaku. And the only thing they omitted was the identification of being a Commonwealth Minuteman. Now, a Minuteman, they were individuals who were colonials during the United States Revolutionary War, and they were among the first combatants to fight against the English, and they were among those who spread the word of the English arriving in Boston. So there's a lot of cultural and historical significance to the term Minutemen, and I was really curious to what sort of role this is going to play in Fallout 4.
I think that they are going to have a big picture recurring motif of revolution and colonialism, that we're going to see a faction of ragtag rebels that are represented by the Minutemen and the common people of the Commonwealth, with the Institute being seen as a technologically advanced imperialist culture. And there was a little pinch of that in Fallout New Vegas, with the NCR being seen as everything bad about, the colonial industrial society, with the Legion and other little groups being seen as, the ragtag rebels, or the natives and the indigenous people. So I think we're going to see a more clearly defined version of that in Fallout 4. And my guess is going to be that the Institute is going to represent a force that's trying to impose civilization on the rest of the savage commonwealth around it. And the player will end up being able to choose factions within that. All right, so now another artsy-smartsy thing is the literary references. I believe that they're making some deliberate references to Buck Rogers. And for those of you who never really got into Buck Rogers, Buck was a guy from the early 20th century who was cryogenically frozen or put in suspended animation, depending on which adaptation you're looking at. And Buck wakes up 500 years in the future, where there are jetpacks and laser guns, and the future turns out to be exactly like what people in the early 20th century thought it would be like. And in some versions of Buck Rogers, there's a post-apocalyptic savage wasteland where only a small number of cities have survived and maintained their technology. So I think that the designers of Fallout 4 are very deliberately picking up on that Buck Rogers concept. We have a protagonist who's been cryogenically frozen or put into some form of suspended animation, and he remembers the world before the apocalypse. And he comes into a future where, yes, it's an amazing future with jetpacks that we know now. There's going to be jetpacks and laser guns, and we are going to see pockets of high technology civilization surrounded by savage wasteland. And I wouldn't be surprised if we found out that a major quest in this game involves someone needs specific pre-war knowledge. Buck Rogers, in his earliest incarnation, was a World War I veteran, and people of the future needed his old world military training and knowledge to help fight futuristic wars. So people of the future needed his old world military training to fight the futuristic wars. And so I think we're going to see the exact same thing playing out in Fallout 4, where your character is now a special person and different factions need your pre-war knowledge to help them win their side of the war that's being fought.
Which actually makes a lot of sense, because the world has some civilizations and has some institutions, but they're all kind of trying to figure out how to be institutions and civilizations again, whereas he's a relic from a well-established civilization right up until its very last unraveling. So yeah, I mean, even something, barring maybe the Enclave, even things like the NCR, in New Vegas, you almost get the feeling that the NCR is playing government, like they're trying really hard to act like a government and a military would, but it always felt kind of inauthentic, like intentionally inauthentic, in a really interesting kind of way. So I actually, with you describing Buck Rogers that way, I think you're 100%, even if it was not intentional, the influences are there.
Yes, and I will go out and say directly, these references are intentional, because most of these designers, they are the exact age that when they were children, they would have been watching the old Buck Rogers TV show from the 70s. So a lot of the higher-ups at Bethesda, they're in their mid-40s, and they were definitely watching Buck Rogers from in the 70s. And in the 1970s TV show, they took it in a different direction than the original Buck Rogers. But I'm sure that they've done their research over the course of their lives and looked up what Buck Rogers used to be when he was created in the old days, and they're now deliberately putting in these references and using that as a formula or a guideline for one of the quest lines.
Something I've always admired about Bethesda in general and Obsidian in a lot of other ways, all these developers that have worked on Fallout kind of have this going for them, is they take these things, and a lot of them are older than their main player base, and they take all these influences and it's almost like you feel like they've been wanting to make a story influenced by these things that influence them as children. And what's something really interesting about this is they take these influences like Buck Rogers and they repackage all the concepts and ideas and deliver them to a new audience. So it's almost like they're in a way preserving all of those narrative elements and giving them to people who wouldn't ever have the opportunity to be exposed to that sort of storytelling.
Absolutely true. There's all these little things that if you're a 14-year-old gamer right now, you probably didn't watch the original Mad Max movie way back in the 80s. You know, you didn't watch, the Damnation Alley movie that came out that was terrible, or read the original novel that movie was based on. So, there's this mountain of things that, yes, these middle-aged men are now trying to share the classic nerd literature with a new generation. And now it's time for a segment on GNN that we call Social Justice Weekly, wherein we look at the social and political themes within the game and examine what may or may not outrage people. So let's start with the character customization screen. So, for those of you who haven't seen it yet, the character customization screen lets you choose between having a male or female character. And it's a cute little scene where a husband and wife are sharing a bathroom mirror. But creating your character, you are required to be in a heterosexual marriage in order to do this. You switch between male or female, designing yourself and your partner so you can play as a male or female character, but you don't have the opportunity to choose the gender of the other person. Or at least that's how it's implied in what we saw. There may be an opportunity that hasn't been revealed yet where you can flip a button and choose to be gay, which will no doubt offend an entirely different group of people. So you are forced to be in a heterosexual marriage, or you have to flip a switch and choose to be gay. Do you think this might offend people?
I had actually caught a little bit of commentary and outrage on Twitter, so I think yes. I think the answer is already yes, it has offended people.
Yes, I've deliberately stayed away from Twitter and Tumblr regarding that specific aspect, but it is something that I think people are going to get mad about it, and I also think Bethesda will get in trouble if they do include the gay switch that you can flip. People will be outraged that same-sex marriage is even an option. And another thing that if you looked really closely in the final montage, there's a brief shot of a male character model wearing what looks like a red cocktail dress.
I was really excited when I saw that because it was always weird to me that that you couldn't do that in the previous games. It just seemed very strange, because if you had like the clothing like sexy sleepwear, and if you put that on a lady, it was a nightie. If you put it on a guy, it was like silk pajamas. And so I was actually just really surprised. I was like, oh, you can wear a dress as a guy. Look at that.
Yeah, I'm happy to see that they're having specific gender clothing, or that the item of clothing remains the same no matter who wears it. In Fallout 3 and New Vegas, sometimes an outfit would look really cool on one gender and then kind of stupid on the other. So if you wanted to switch back and forth and have a female character model wearing, the leopard print pajamas, or if you wanted to have a male character model wearing the tank girl nuclear bomb bra, then you couldn't do it. So I'm happy to see this as a mechanic within the game, even though a lot of people are going to be outraged by it. All right, so now it's time for a commercial break. When we get back, we're going to have a special guest, Howard Braunschweiger, the actor who plays Grognak the Barbarian, here on GNN in the New Adventures of Grognak the Barbarian every Sunday night. But first, here's a word from our sponsor.
In a world ruled by swords, sorcery, and savages, one man became a legend. From the pages of the world's most popular comic book to the screen of your local drive-in comes Grognak, a warrior from the land of Prehistoria, embarks on an adventure beyond your wildest fantasies. Warrior, destroyer, conqueror. He is Grognak the Barbarian, featuring Zane Valoric as Scopocalypse, Vera Keys as Femra, and introducing Howard Braunschweiger as Grognak the Barbarian. Coming to a theater near you, Thanksgiving weekend 2077.
Welcome back. Those of you who are regular listeners of GNN will know our next guest from his portrayal of Grognak the Barbarian in the Grognak movies as well as the Grognak radio show.
Sunday nights here on GNN.
Please welcome Howard Braunschweiger.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's great to be here. I'm a big fan of the show, Carl.
It's an honor to have you here. We're both big fans of Grognak.
Now, for our listeners who haven't been tuning in to the new adventures of Grognak the Barbarian, how is the radio show different from the Grognak movies?
The radio show is inspired by the original Grognak short stories and novels, not the comic books and Saturday morning cartoon that came later. It's a more mature take on the Grognak franchise. The show is filled with Nietzschean philosophy, and Grognak is held up as the Nietzschean ideal of Das Übermensch.
And this Sunday was the season premiere of the show.
And spoiler alert, they killed off one of the main characters. Again.
Yeah, they killed off Skullpocalypse, played by my good friend Shane Veloic. Shane left the show abruptly to pursue other projects, so the writers had his character eaten alive by wolves.
How did the fans react to that?
Every time we kill off a major character, the fans act like little sissy babies. They complain and they cry on the Twitters and the Instagrams and things like that. But our writers love to hear the lamentation of the viewers.
There's a video game adaptation coming soon too, right?
It's called Grognak the Barbarian versus the Elder Trolls. It's being made by this little game studio in Delaware or something like that. But they've been working on it for 8 years, so you know it's going to be good.
Will you be doing the voice of Grognak in the game too?
Of course, no one else can do it. Because when I speak, you can hear the sound waves vibrating through the muscles in my chest. That's why I sound like a barbarian. A scrawny little voice actor couldn't fake that. You can hear the rippling of pectorals with every syllable when I flex like this.
Is acting in a video game different from acting in a movie or on the radio?
In the video game, there's more grunting and screaming. In my movies, sometimes I have dozens of lines to say, but in the game, there isn't much talking, just me clashing my enemy's skulls with my battle axe. So most of the voice acting is me doing various screamings while swinging my battle axe in the sound studio.
You brought an axe into the recording booth?
Yeah, that's authenticity to the sounds. I'm a method actor, so I always bring the axe with me when I record Grognak or do interviews about the show. If I just stood there in front of the microphone going, "Oh, Vog, sounds like play acting, right?" But when I use my body on the axe, it sounds more realistic. For example, this is what it sounds like when Grognak does a two-handed uppercut. Ah!
I'm sure the folks at home get the idea.
And this is the backhand. Oh!
Watch out for the...
And this is what it sounds like when Grognak gets hit by one of the bad guys. Ah! 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 And this is when the end boss throws Grognak through the wall of the Snake Temple. Ah! Ah!
All right, that was Howard Braunschweiger from the New Adventures of Grognak. We'll be back.
And when Grognak's power meter is fully charged, he gets to do this ultimate barbarian scream attack.
We'll be back right after these words from Rob.
Fos Roda!
And we're back. We apologize for the technical difficulties. We'd like to thank Howard Braunschweiger for stopping by the studio. And now let's close the show with another installment of a weekly segment we call Irresponsible Speculations. So Austin, what are your irresponsible speculations? Because the people making this game, they're real people. There are hundreds of them down there in Maryland working hard. It's their day job. And when we just rumor monger or make stuff up or release leaks, we're screwing with people's lives. Now, let's screw with their lives. What are your irresponsible speculations?
Well, if you were watching the entire Bethesda stage, you may have noticed that there was a couple little notes to the Elder Scrolls. One of which was an expansion for the Elder Scrolls Online, and the other was the Elder Scrolls Legends, which is a customizable card game which is set in Tamriel. I believe and I am reasonably certain about this, that there is in development currently right now something to the effect of Elder Scrolls Akaviri Chronicles, which is a multiplayer online battle arena game similar to League of Legends. I think it has to come. They've already gone down the path of Blizzard. They've made the card game, they've made the MMO. This is it. This is the only other thing they need to do, other than maybe a strategy game.
Oh, and there's also obviously going to have to be some iPhone game as well. They did Fallout Shelter, so I guess Elder Scrolls is going to have some little iPhone game that's Throw to the World Shelter, where you make your own little graybeards and blades. All right, but I do think that your irresponsible speculation about a MOBA is 100% accurate. It would be crazy for them not to make it.
I have to admit I laughed a little bit when they announced Elder Scrolls Legends. I was like, oh, so this is the path that the major game developers are taking now. Everyone's gonna have their little card game. It really reminds me of when Magic the Gathering got popular in the 90s. Everyone had their own little Magic the Gathering card game of some kind. There was Pokemon, there was Yu-Gi-Oh, and there was a bajillion more. So I actually think that that's a real thing that is actually going to happen. I don't think Bethesda is weird for doing it. I think they may just be slightly ahead of the curve of all the other soon-to-be AAA industry games that are going to be getting in on that.
All right, now my irresponsible speculation from last week about Skyrim 2 has not been officially confirmed, but there was some rumor mongering about Skyrim 2 posted around the internet for a while. So I am going to stick by my irresponsible speculation from last week that we are going to see another Elder Scrolls game released in the near future, but it'll be another game that's either set in Skyrim or that is another adventure for the Dragonborn characters.
The source of those rumors was a survey given by Ubisoft that asked people if they were likely to, I believe it was if they were likely to buy Skyrim 2 or Dishonored 2. And Dishonored 2 was an announcement that came with the E3. Obviously, Ubisoft doesn't have any sort of insights into what Bethesda is developing necessarily, but I think that lends a little bit of weight to the speculation. I think you may not be wrong. As disappointing as I am to not visit Kittyland in Tamriel, I think you are onto something.
Yes, but I will say at some point in the future there will be another proper Elder Scroll game set in Elsewhere or Argonia, the land of the sexy lizard people. But next up, I think we are looking at more of the frigid Northlands. All right, so that brings us to the. Was there anything else you wanted to talk about?
I have one more bit of irresponsible speculation that I forgot about. So, we talked about the intro sequence for Fallout 4 being set in the past, and you're a character who has all these skill sets, and you get to live through the Great War happening. And then what happens is they kind of skipped over whatever the interim would be in the reveal because they don't want to give everything away.
And then stuff happens, and then you wake up 200 years later.
You wake up alone, a lone survivor of the vault 200 years in the future. So we talked about how Blade Runner was an influence, possible influence for Fallout 4. And so, one of the main plot points of Blade Runner, and spoiler warning for those of you who have not seen Blade Runner, is that they are developing androids that have a full set of memories that make them more stable and more easy to control. So I have a theory that the main protagonist is not actually from the old world. That the main protagonist is an android that was created, and those old world memories were put there to help them cope with whatever mission it is that the Commonwealth wants them to accomplish. That is my irresponsible speculation about Fallout 4.
I think that somewhere in Maryland, at the exact time that this airs, somebody down in Maryland is punching their desk and screaming, "God damn it, we gotta rewrite the whole damn game now!" And so that is the embodiment of irresponsible speculations. You've probably just guessed a major plot point, and some poor bastard down in Maryland has gotten fired for including too many hints in the trailer. So I hope you're happy with yourself now.
I would be very happy if a Bethesda employee called. Well, I'd be very sad that they lost their jobs, but I think I'd feel very happy for having been right about that. If a Bethesda employee is listening to this, someone who's in charge of the plot and wants to tell me, I promise promise not to reveal it on the podcast.
As a former Bethesda employee currently carrying a little shoebox full of his possessions, a picture of his wife and his dog and his children who are going to go hungry because of you and this damn podcast and our irresponsible behavior. So on that, we'd like to thank you for joining us. We are a weekly podcast. Please join us every week. This week's podcast was recorded on the Wednesday in the middle of E3. So next week we'll be back with our full E3 wrap-up and how Bethesda and Fallout compared to the other big reveals that have happened. And as always, you can reach me, Charles Battersby at charlesbattersby.com, or you can check out my Twitter, Charles Battersby with no Y on the end. And Austin, how can people stalk you?
You can find me on Twitter, where I talk far too much, at ARHorrigan.
And of course, stop in every week to shoddycast.com or Shoddycast YouTube channel for new weekly episodes of Fallout Lore, the Storyteller series.
I'm Austin Horrigan.
And I'm Charles Battersby, and this has been GNN.